Canter is the big dog at Longwood University. And yesterday, we all came in and trained and had a little barbecue, and it was awesome. And we had a little talk before we were warming up, because everyone was warming up, and we were just sitting down rolling out our feet, because I don't know, that's what we wanted to do. But he was talking to me about how to make myself better at public speaking and how we can help our athletes more, because at the end of the day, we're servants to our athletes. And he was saying at Longwood, he does about 3 presentations a semester, right?
Well, my staff does, yeah, but that's one of the things we do, yeah.
Their staffing does presentations, because we only have a certain amount of time to talk with our athletes, you know, and really we got to train. So it's about training, training, training. You don't get time to know them or learn them or present other topics to them like nutrition, alcohol, things like life, stressors that they're going to face. So he brought up a great idea that I'm going to introduce this to Hammer and see if we can do it here at RMU. Is just try that. Get a group of athletes, say Wednesday night, this time we're having this seminar about nutrition, this how to handle stress. And one, if you give that to your assistants or even if you do it yourself, you're going to improve yourself public speaking wise, talking to athletes, and you're giving them more information to make them better human beings. So I thought that was awesome. And he's going to talk today about leading with lenses. I'm very excited to hear about it. Coach,
thank you.
It's all you.
Well, first I'd love to just throw out a thank you to the RMU staff. They've been great. I was very fortunate. I got to intern here about 7 years. 7 years? Damn. I'm getting old. Yeah. I was thinner. Yeah, so about 7 years ago, and it was definitely going to be, when I first got here, the thing that was going to be the catalyst that really fueled my passion for strength conditioning. And just before I start up, I want to just thank the mentors that had helped me on my journey within the field right now. But Tim Belts at Pitt, he was tremendous to work under. Extremely smart guy with the men's and women's basketball team at the time. I had the opportunity there. I also had the opportunity to go to Auburn when Coach Yoxel was there, I learned so much about standards and mindset that it was just unbelievable to me and just eye-opening. John Hark, who was at Longwood when I first got there, who eventually led out of the field, but taught me a lot about balance, about commitment. And then Tim Contos, who's at VCU, who I've got to know a lot in these last couple of years, who is very much, in my opinion, one of the best in the country. We have a very unique situation, but before I get into that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. In the early years, I was thinner than I am now. However, I want you to think about what got you where you are right now. And what I want you to think about is the early years. What was the first thing that picks up in your mind right now that says, you know what, that was when I found out this is my path. This is when I was going to be going in this direction, and I had a guide, a compass, right? And for me, I remember vividly, it was like yesterday. I was sitting in my apartment in college, and I had a sunroof, whatever, in my apartment. Which, whatever, it was awesome, right? So it's 6:30 in the morning, and I'm just emailing out all of these coaches in the Pittsburgh area. I'm from Swickley, it's right down the road. And so I didn't know what to expect. I was just like, hey, I want to volunteer. I was, I think, a sophomore in college at the time. And so I email all these coaches. I'm like, please, I'll do whatever. I'll come in. I'll volunteer in the winter when I'm at home, in the summer, all summer long when I'm at home. And I go to the bathroom, and I come back, and it was cloudy in the morning. I literally come right back in 20 minutes later, and a sunbeam just shoots down through the clouds. It's weird. And there was an email, one email. I sent out 20, one email, Todd Hammer. And Hammer he doesn't have a halo over his head for the record, but I will say that that was probably the first moment I realized I'm congruent now. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do. So I came down. I remember what it felt like. I remember walking down the steps down to Joe Walton Stadium over there. I remember walking in. I remember the environment. I remember the athletes. I remember the coaches at the time, his GA. I remember him literally coming up to me very open. Please feel free to come and intern with us. And so I remember that stuff because that stuff matters when we go through tough times in the profession. Whenever a coach is in a massive argument with me or one of my staff members or an athlete mouths off, I remember that because I remember I wanted to be in this. This was my direction. That fuels me to go through tough times. And so I'm going to talk a little bit differently today about something that's maybe we don't really put a lot of conscious effort into thinking about, which is general leadership. What does it mean to be a good leader? What does it mean to be a bad leader? And that's built off of your own opinions as well. But think about that. Think about the early years. Think about the event that really catapulted you in your career. So I have a very, very unique scenario at Longwood. I have been very fortunate to ascend into an assistant AD role. And I have oversight over sports medicine, academics, my unit, and sports psychology. So I have a very unique scenario. So when I approach and I talk about leadership today, some of the things that I'll talk about are some of the things I've used in the very nuanced, idiosyncratic type of communication that I've had with administrators, with ATs, with student athletes, with other strength coaches. And it has helped me and has bolstered me in my career. Now, with that said, there's a massive learning curve when you eventually send in these responsibilities. I didn't know anything initially about going into academics. Sports medicine, you hope to think that you have a little bit of a crossover, but academics, I don't know anything about APR and GPA requirements and all that stuff. So there is a little bit of a learning curve, but that's going to be how it is wherever you go. We're always interning, right? We're always really interns in our mindset, and we're always trying to approach and grow consistently. So just to keep that in mind, because I'm going to talk about what that type of collaboration, when you get everybody on the same page, what it can really do for your university. All right, so the first thing I want you to think about, who is someone you feel is a great leader? If I said, who is somebody, think about them right now. Think about what they look like. Think about what they sound like. Think about their behaviors. Think about that person right now. Why are they great? Now, picture that person in your head. This is what I want you to do. I want you to get up. I want you to meet somebody that you haven't met yet. If my presentation sucks today, at least you met somebody else. All right? Get up. I want you to discuss this. I'm going to be about 2 minutes. Go. All right, so bringing it back to the group now, let's just function as one cohesive group, right? So let's get a couple of examples. Anybody want to share? Anyone want to take the risk, throw out their ideas, what they had, who they thought of? Anybody? Go ahead.
I'm going to say my dad.
Okay, why?
He was a coach, basketball coach for 30 years. He always gave me options. He never gave me answers.
Very cool. Anybody else?
I said mine was my commander. He's a lieutenant colonel. The first time I met him, he came up and he goes, "My name's Ray," and I was like, "No, sir, you're lieutenant colonel." But he's strict, but he's fair.
Very personable, right? Anybody else? Yeah?
My mom, she always, no matter what I was doing or worked at or wanted to do, she was always in support of anything and was happy to see what result was going on with what I was doing.
Right. So a lot of people generate their conceptual framework of what they think good leadership is, right, from their previous perceptions, their previous memories, their previous moments that they've lived. So for me, it was a coach when I was growing up. For others, it might be a pastor, it might be a family member, it might be some other former relative. We generate because we identify these behaviors, the way they say things, how they interact, are they authentic, right? Well, today, what I want you to think about is what makes you different from them? How far is the separation? Are you even really different? I said what was really good leadership. You thought about all these little traits. What makes you different in that sense? And so when we're talking about leadership today, I love this quote. That pretty much, I'll write the summary of it. A leader is literally a person who affects the thoughts, feelings, behaviors of a significant amount of people. So for all intents and purposes, for synonyms today, we're going to say coach is a leader. We're going to see if you're a mentor to another younger strength coach, you're a leader. If you're a friend to somebody at times, you may have to influence their thoughts, their behaviors, their actions. You're a leader, right? So with good, solid leadership, we have the ability to create momentum towards a common good. The question is, right? The question is, how do you get that shared consciousness? How do you move people together in the same direction? We do that every day. You figured this out on an everyday basis with your athletes. You have a microcosm of an organization that comes in the weight room. They're either all together or they're not. And yes, of course, naturally, we're going to have days where it's going to be tougher, where we have a little internal dysfunctional conflict. That's natural. but how are you going to be intentional about the process of getting everybody on the same page and moving them in the same direction? For me, I use my teams as a platform so that I can learn these traits. I also use my staff, my direct staff, and I use all the other departments that I have the opportunity and privilege to oversee to push me and learn how do I get better. And so you need to identify at various times you might serve as a direct or indirect leader. Okay, now when we talk about direct leaders, we're talking about people typically in an oversight position, right? If I'm in charge of my staff members, I'm in a direct position. From a power point of view, it's positional power. I've earned the right there. I am exerting my influence on that. That's natural. That's fine. They are influenced by the stories that you create, the stories that you tell. And so everybody here, when they're coaching, you're telling a story. You're talking about commitment. You're talking about dedication. It's just a various different stories. So when you're with your athletes, maybe you're in a direct position. You're a direct leader in that scenario. Indirect, usually influenced by some of the ideas that you embody. And so for me, within my department, I might be a direct leader for the student athletes that I work with, but I may be an indirect leader for other areas within my athletic department. And so when they think of our area, they're thinking commitment, dedication, hard work. And that's the stuff that we embody. You guys naturally do this when you think about your coaching philosophy. Not just the strength and conditioning specific things, but the other intangibles. And we do this because we put up core values on walls, and we say hard work and commitment and dedication, right? These are the stories that you're telling. So you have to be intentional about that. So identify in your head in your various, in the various milieu or the situations that you're currently in at your work, when do you shift? When's the shift between you being a direct influence on individuals and the point at which you are now indirect? And if you can identify that, then let's start to be intentional about how we communicate on all those levels. All right, so I'll throw out a quote as well. I feel like everybody's doing it, so let's do it. But one of my favorites is by General Stanley McChrystal, who's retired, but it was, the thing about leadership is you fail every day. If you read that quote and you think about it from a point of view with a negative connotation, then you're like, well, that sucks, right? It's very simple to do that. But this motivates me. If you look at it with the glasses half full, the positive connotation, you're good. That tells me that there's somebody right now that I'm failing at leading. That's fine. That's good because that knows and tells me that I'm going to get better. We never fully realize, right? You never come to full realization of your own abilities to lead. That's a natural thing. There's always going to be people that you probably could do a better job of. That's okay. One day at a time, getting better every day, and identifying what you need to do to make a better impact and to leverage the platform that you're on. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three things: the self, the science. I'm not going to go too science heavy because it sounds like we're about to be really science heavy. That's fine. And the submission. And first, I'd like to always include my staff. This is student athlete enhancement. This is our area. So we have a couple ATs. We have academics in the back. We have my staff. And so we are very much all on the same page. But that's an intentional thing. It takes a lot of time. This was our area, our department, how we move. This was years in the making. It took a lot, at least 5 or 6 years in order to get the idea of this going forward. And it's not always realistic at every other place. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But it's important that when you're creating a sense of relatedness with your group, whether it's with the team, whether it's with your department, that you're being intentional about it, that you're being authentic about it. So for the self, leadership starts with you. Most people aren't told, hey, you're a leader. Hey, you're a leader. No, they don't do that. It's not something that's in our common lexicon, right? So you're a leader. Now, number one, I do this a lot because I also run our leadership program for our student athletes. And when I'm in that group, we meet three times a semester. And we start the very first one with all about self-awareness. So who are you, right? What are the things that you embody? What are the things that you appreciate? These are questions you should be asking in your head, and it'll only make you a better coach. If you're more authentic in your communication, chances are athletes will be more impacted from you. So we do things like DISC profiles, personality tests. That's one thing that you can do in order to increase a little bit more of a self-awareness. What do you value? If I asked you, what are your top 3 personal values, would you know what they are? And that's okay, because we're going to find that out today for you. I'm going to try to hopefully help you out. If I asked you what your 3 personal values are, would you know what they are? Because values, a lot of times, will drive behavior. Who are you trying to become? I got this from NPR. Hammer loves NPR. I got this at one point. He had indirectly did it. He like sent it out one time, and it just stuck with me. And it was like, are you an intentional consumer, engager, or producer? Are you intentional in consuming? So what you take in your own professional development, in your own studies, are you intentional? Are you intentional with the things you produce? Presentations, articles, programs. Are you being intentional about that? Right? Are you being intentional as an engager when you're with athletes or when you're with administrators? And what does that mean? What does it mean to be intentional with that? What are the little things that you can pick up on that will help you interact better with administrators or athletes? So the other aspect too is obviously the science. And probably about 4 or 5 years back was when I decided, okay, I wanted to, we talk about niches, right? Well, I wanted to kind of focus more into this area because my AD had challenged me and he wanted me to try to evolve more into running our leadership program. So what I did was I just focused on this. Well, there are thousands upon thousands of books on this stuff. And so you figure out that you're pulling from all kind of different interdisciplinary areas in order to develop your own leadership abilities. And leadership, I hear lately from what we've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's now become synonymous in my eyes with core. It's overused. Mental toughness is overused. We hear it from our coaches a lot. Well, we just need better leadership. Well, you're impacting their leadership abilities, so you need to understand how do you get better first. If you get better, chances are our athletes will be a product of the environment that we create. So our gyms can naturally ascend into more of a leadership lab, so to speak, where we teach these values. Now, one of the reasons why I put this on here is because our university, Bob talked a little bit about when you're a administrator, you have to be congruent, right, with the university. What's your overall mission? Our specific mission is to develop citizen leaders. And so how do we do that intentionally in our weight rooms? And naturally, and this is probably the most important aspect of the whole slide, it's very easy, and I tell this to a lot of the younger strength coaches I get to work with, is that ego is rampant with a lot of our athletes, right? You probably see and interact with athletes on a daily basis. A lot of times these things pop out and you hear little tiny nuanced things in their communication that says, well, they think that they're bigger than they really are. And so we promote, we say, come to Longwood, it's great here. You're going to have a great environment, all this other stuff. And then they get here and then the coaches ream them out how bad they are, right? Because naturally now you got to start getting them better. You got to get them up to the level of playing. That's natural. But we find athletes now who have a really high degree of ego. So how do you get everybody on the same page when everybody has different opinions? So remember that. Humility will be the thing, intentional humility. In your career, a lot of times if you have the intent behind it, it will fuel you to want to grow continually. Because if not, that little voice, that little narrative in your head is the thing that's saying, you know what, I'm good here. And that's where the fixed mindset starts to come in, right? And you don't get any better. Ego is it. I'll throw on occasional book recommendations on throughout my slides. Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, phenomenal book. Very simple to read. I've had athletes read it. They love it. But essentially the basis of it is as you're ascending, as you're aspiring, as you're succeeding, and as you fail, ego is the thing that's going to hold you back. And then also humility is the new smart. This is written by a business professor at UVA. A very interesting read for the athletes that are coming up, the next generation that's coming up and what they're relying on. All right, so I said we were going to do the self, the science, the submission. The first one, the self. I want you to know what your core values are, your top 3 or 4 or 5, and I'll show you in a minute here. My assistant is going to pass out a values sheet. We do this with our athletes. If I can make a greater impact, hopefully I can make a greater impact with the athlete when they're outside the weight room and they leave Longwood. And so if they're a little bit more sure of themselves, if they can develop a little more self-awareness with their own abilities, hopefully I make a better impact. And maybe I can change a life, right? That's what we're here to do. We're trying to change lives, so to speak. Okay, so you're going to have a sheet here. You're going to see a lot of different words. If you don't know a word, just look it up. It's fine. Now, with that said, what I want you to do in the next 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how long it takes, I want you to look through each one. And I want you to put a very conscious effort into seeing if you identify with this word or not. And here's one of the best things about this. Where you're at right now, do this again 5, 10 years, it might be completely different. I did this at a program last year, and a lot of the people there were like, I really want to put family, but right now it's just not something that really resonates with me. That's fine. The most important thing right now is for you to become more of yourself, right? You become more of you. So if we're going to do this, you need to be honest with yourself. We're not going to share this. This is just for you, so don't worry about that. Look through it, identify it. I want you to circle the top 10. Circle the top 10. Go. Okay, once you get those 3, I want you to just write them up on the side, write them up top, right on the side, wherever, just write them down. Those are your 3. Right now, those 3 really resonate with you. You associate with those 3. So now you know, hopefully, maybe you know a little bit more about yourself. Maybe you're like, that's it. That's good. Because if you know a little bit more about yourself, you can be more authentic. You can be more authentic, you'll have a better ability to influence the people that follow you. And so values do 2 things. They can act as an anchor when you're having a lot of those challenges, those tough times in your profession, but they can also act as a compass. When you have very difficult decisions and you're trying to think, what's the best approach? What do I do? Use your values. Top 3 values, very important. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the various interdisciplinary considerations that you might want to think about. And we have one of the biggest things I took away from interning here that Hammer did a phenomenal job of teaching me was more about how do you become more effective in critical thinking. So how do you take various areas and start to plug them in together? How can you really try to sift through a lot of these various things and try to think that really applies in these scenarios? And so what I want to do is I want to throw out a couple ideas for you to serve as a prompt, like a personal growth prompt, so to speak, that you can take and you can, okay, I'm going to start to learn a little bit more about this here or this here, and how does that apply to my coaching, my leading, my influencing? So the first one is communication. This is a great book to read, what everybody is saying, but if you've ever heard of Moravian's rule, it's that 7% of your communication is verbal. That you take away 38% of it, as how you say it, the intonation, and that 55% of it is more facial. But where people misinterpret this study and the rule was the fact that they connected to just all information, but that's not the case. It was specifically with likability and the feelings and attitudes. So when we communicate, if I have an athlete who comes to me and they're talking about likability or if they're talking about their feelings and attitudes, this could apply. But we pick up on this. Because when people talk about these really personal things, they talk about their feelings, how their thoughts, their moods. If they're not congruent with their body language, we can tell. Right? We have a little internal mechanism that says this doesn't look congruent here. And it's called sifting through bullshit. Right? It's what you do with coaches a lot, right? So they say one thing and then you go another way and their body language is saying completely different. So if we can be an intentional engager, we can learn and bolster our abilities to communicate better, chances are you're going to have a better impact. Better impact, hopefully better results. So be congruent. Our athletes use these nowadays to communicate how they feel. It happens. So we have to adapt. We have to adapt to how they like to communicate. All right? So being intentional versus being indiscriminate. So are you communicating with intent behind what you're doing, or are you just kind of going on autopilot, which is very natural when we work long hours. So if we identify, naturally our stress for our field is a long hour type of thing, and that it's going to be hard in that last 6th or 7th or 8th group, what are you going to do to get you right back on the same path so you can have an impact with those athletes just as much as the ones in the beginning? So you're the encoder, you have a message, whatever that is. Person receives it. They receive it how they want to receive it. That's the response. That's the stimulus. You send out a message, that's your stimulus. So from a biological point of view of using lenses, 2 books, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, probably one of the best books that you can read about general stress. Also, molecules of motion, which is really good, and talking about the differences between your forebrain, the high brain, the limbic system, really good stuff to think about. But you communicate a stimulus. You communicate a coaching cue. You say good job. You say bad job. How you say it also dictates their response. That's natural. If I freak out on you, I throw a lot of obscenities, that's natural too. They're going to have an emotional reaction. They have a physical reaction, no different. When you were growing up, if you had a coach in the first couple teams that you're growing up and they freaked out on you, how'd you feel? You had an emotional reaction. Maybe your adrenaline shot up. Maybe you went into fight or flight. These things happen. They happen with sport coaches who are very, very emotionally driven at times. And when it's their program and it's their team and it's their athletes, it's very natural to have emotional reactions. And so how you tailor how you say stuff, the nonverbal, the verbal, that makes a difference. So there is a biological response. Now, if you are putting athletes or the people that you lead into fight or flight, there are times that we can do that, right? We go to test day, we're jacked up, I drank a pot of coffee, right? I did nose torque, whatever, I'm ready to roll. I'm gonna scream at people, whatever. Okay, it's pretty damn sympathetic in that position, that's fine. But with that said, are we doing that long term? Are you putting people into these types of fight or flight responses long term? And what are the detriments of that? And we've seen, and if you read Why Zebra Gets Ulcers, you know, you'll talk about the autoimmune deficiency or the autoimmune diseases that could potentially come out. We talk about stress. Right now, one of the main reasons, one of the main drivers for us consolidating all of our units has been because of mental health. Mental health with our student athletes right now is the main thing that we need to focus on. We have more issues with mental health in our department right now than anything else. Last year it exposed us. We realized, what are we doing? How are we being conscious about helping make a better impact with our athletes? How are we identifying this? How are we consciously identifying this? Which is hard, because you hear about athletes who have depression and anxiety, and some don't want to share. So how do you structure your unit so you can try to pick up on these little small, tiny things that they say or how they communicate? And that's what we're trying to do. And I'll talk a little bit about the very end about what we're going to do in order to try to get and pull together the informal communication that they naturally do. I really like this topic a lot, but epigenetics is really about the science about how genes can be affected from your environment. And so let's say that we had a biological reaction, your stress response went up. Two great books to read if you're interested in this topic. This is really a short book and fun and engaging. It's like a comic book, except not. The communication is a lot. How the environment shapes our genes, that's a really cool one. This is all just thoughts. So I'm not giving you like this is based on factual research. These are thoughts, but a lot of the research that has come out has stemmed, and they do a lot of these studies for identifying how your environment shapes your genes from various things like veterans who have PTSD. Athletes, but individuals who are abused growing up. And so this is on a very long-term chronic level, but keep in mind this, it's not always a bad thing. Some of the changes that we see, why exercise can be beneficial for people, and specifically for mental health relief, right, and the cognitive benefits stem from some epigenetic changes. And so when we get to that, if you read more on that, now connect that with how you're communicating and how you're leading. If I lead and I make an environment that is naturally negative, long term, how do you feel when you're around somebody right now who's constantly negative about this, you know what I mean? You're drained. It's emotionally draining. When you're with a coach who's very much a similar way, it's emotionally draining. You're having a response because of that. So it's something to keep in mind. It's something to consider in your learning. So your followers, and I believe this, I like to try to lead with axioms, right? Your followers are a product of your environment, very much so. How you create your environment, how you shape it, what you expect, what you don't expect, very much possible. Now, it's not cookie cutter. It never is. It's never cookie cutter. We get people from all walks of life with all types of different experiences. That's great. Embrace them, but still maintain high standards. High standards doesn't necessarily mean that I got to go and ream you out every single day, which is a lot of younger coaches, especially sport coaches, think they have to do. That's not necessarily the case. You can hold high standards and communicate with a way that they feel authentic, but they still want to work. Influence. more of a psychological or neuroscientific point of view. But one of the best things that I started doing was reading up a lot on cognitive biases. When you read more about your own biases and you can accept them, right, and learn from them, you can pick up on your thought process when you're learning, when you're going through and coaching, when you're programming, right? When I look over the programs, once I started learning some of this, and I go back to the computer, I'm going through my programming, I'm thinking like, well, why did I do this? It's really actually pretty trippy, but why am I doing this? Is this confirmation bias? If it is, fine. There are times when you don't want to make yourself a robot, but it's going to make you a little bit more rational. If you're more rational, maybe you can have a little bit greater impact with your program. If you're more rational, maybe you can make a greater emphasis in your head on what's a good time to act like this in a scenario, and what's a good time to act like this in a scenario. And it happens. We naturally do it. We do it so fast. Now, one of the things that we did, one of the cognitive biases that I really love to learn about was social proofing, right? And that's essentially what happens when everybody kind of just does something because everybody else is doing it. And so what I would do is I had an athlete who was asking me about this. And so we were going through like P&F partner stretches and stuff at the very end. And I was like, all right, just watch this. This might be because they're conditioned, but whatever. And I'm like, okay, listen, I'm going to call it the next stretch, but I'm going to say a bunch of just crap out of my mouth. I'll be like, oh, yes, oh, no. Whatever. It sounds ridiculous, right? So I do it. What happens? Everybody changes to the next stretch. Now, some of that's conditioned because they've done it plenty of times. That's fine. But half of them, they changed it, but they waited. They waited until they saw what everybody else was doing, and then they did it. The athletes pick up on that. Now, how does that apply, and how do you get your athlete to understand that concept now outside of the weight room, outside of the playing field? What happens when you're trying to change a culture? You're trying to shift the ideas, the natural thoughts. That's influence, right? And so when you're doing that, get them to understand some of these concepts. Emotional contagion is another great one. We share emotions. So if I come in here and I'm like this, all over the place, how many times does that happen with your athletes? And now that starts to catch, right? This is why people yawn and everybody else starts to yawn, right? And that stems off of mirror neurons, which fire. We see that these things fire, these type of neurons will fire a lot in primates, and it's still theorized with humans, but the same thing, I pick up with this all the time. A mirror neuron will fire, and you will mimic your body language. You will mimic what you communicate to another individual. You probably see this a lot. When you're in staff meetings, in administrators, you see it, you sit around a round table, you sit out, some various table, and a couple of these people pick up on this. A couple of these people are sitting the exact same way when they're resonating with themselves. When he's agreeing with her, what are they doing? They're picked up. You can see this on an unconscious level. These are mirror neurons. These things pick up. So how do you use that to your benefit to become an intentional engager? Now, you don't want to do it so consciously, and because then people are going to pick up on that and be like, well, what the hell are you doing? You're just trying to do the same thing to me. But still, it's something to consider. And so that I consciously do it now in my meetings. So I'm trying to pick up well, they're definitely agreeing with them, but they say one thing and it's completely not congruent with what they're saying to that person. And you can pick up on this stuff. It makes you more effective. It's not necessarily manipulating. You can manipulate for positive things, right? Constructive criticism, you're trying to manipulate them to change behavior. It's feedback. You're pulling feedback in, and that's a natural thing. You're trying to make hopefully a greater impact for the common good. The last one was submission. If you submit to your ego, chances are it's going to shift your focus more inward. It's worried about self-preservation. And so everybody here has them. It's not your goal to take it completely away. Your goal is to quiet it. Your goal is to suppress it at times so that you can learn more. If you can learn more, you can get better. Chances are if you're better, hopefully you have a little more satisfaction and happiness with your career. So if submitting to your ego leads to the shift of focus and your intent inward, the problem with that is that leadership is outward. It's about other people. It's not about you. It's not about, specific tailed off to your department alone. It's about everybody. So how do you do that? How do you think that? What are you going to do when you leave here today that's going to put you in an intentional environment where you can say, okay, did I do this, this, or this? And so for me, what I do is I just have a paper up in my bathroom at home. When I'm looking in the mirror, it says right above, did I let my ego get me off the path to humility? And I put it right above me, so when I look and I look up, it's right there. Now, everybody's always learning, everybody's going to make mistakes. That's fine, that's great. As long as we're continually striving together, then it's worth it. And so I like to use the boat analogy. So we get a lot of people with these the high egos, right? They have strong ass opinions. That's natural. And you can apply this to teams that come in. You can apply this to coaches groups, your head coach and your assistants, which is what I usually do this with. And you can apply this across the board at a more macro level within your athletic department or the organization that you work with. But we have all this, direction. We're trying to create momentum in our influence, and you have dysfunctional conflict, and then all hell breaks loose, right? So you have a lot of these high egos, you have strong opinions, and then you can't go anywhere. So what we have is we have two people rowing in the opposite direction. Where what you're trying to do is figure out how do you bolster your communication abilities, your leading abilities, your influence abilities to get people in the same direction. And that's tough because some people have a fixed mindset. And that's okay. Your goal isn't necessarily to change minds, so to speak. Your goal is to make a greater impact with those athletes, with those coaches, with those other individuals. So if they don't want to receive it, that's on them. So what do you have to do to get everybody in the same direction? And what are you applying that to? Are you applying that to your teams? Are you applying that to the organization you work with now? Are you applying that with the athletic department you work with? Are you applying it to your coaches? What do you have to do to get them all in the same direction? Because once you get them in the same direction, then somebody has to set the pace. Once you get that pace going, then you create momentum, you have greater success. And we see it all the time with our athletes. We see it with a lot of our teams. So lastly, if you could be more intentional about having a little bit greater humility in how you approach things, it opens up your ability to learn more. That's natural. What we do here is, with a lot of our teams, we'll do is something called a hot seat. And the goal of it is to try to create athletes who are comfortable more with being vulnerable. We have a lot of false confidence nowadays, right? You get athletes that come in who, again, they have their strong opinions or high egos, but then when you put them in positions and they fail, the natural thing is, well, you said this, you said you're good, right? That's the natural thing from a coach point of view. But no, your job is to pick them up, to get them going in the same direction. And so we get them in positions where they can be vulnerable with their teammates. And so what we'll do is we'll have an athlete sit right down, we'll have a big semicircle, and they'll go around and they'll say, a good thing, we'll do the sandwich technique, right? They'll say, a good thing what they're doing lately, I see you really working hard. I think you could probably get better at this. But again, you've been really doing a good thing, and I'm really impacted by your behavior. That's an example. It's empowering. It's cathartic, but it's empowering too. They go all the way around, and we do it. It creates a little bit more comfortability there in vulnerability. Extend trust. Extend trust out to your staff members. Trust but verify, right? Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. Extend trust out. If they do something that's not worthy of your trust, then you have to identify. You got to talk about it. But extend trust. Be authentic in how you communicate. And I like to use the self-determination theory, if you've ever heard of it, for trying to motivate people intrinsically. And I use this model for my department right now. So I inherited staff members from academics. I was able to be on some of the interview process for my ATs. I handpicked my guys. So it's different everywhere. But how do I get everybody intrinsically motivated, wanting to follow the same direction? And so what I try to do, and this is hard at times, I give the directors their accountability, or autonomy. They run their shop the way they need to run the shop. We do things that are going to try to be intentional about developing our competence. We do things like this. We do things, we meet once a week as a whole staff. We do videos, we do articles, we talk about different concepts and ways to do it. But more importantly, and this is the most important, is we create a sense of relatedness. And so it's not AT over here, academics over there, strength coaches, sports performance over there. It's not. Now it's everybody in the same roof. We're all one unit. That's a benefit. And there's a benefit because the big obstacle that we have right now, which for us, it might be different everywhere, is mental health. All right, so what we're doing now, and this is the benefit of collaboration. Because we're all on the same page, right, I can exert some of these types of theory and model. It gets them a little bit more motivated. If they're more motivated, chances are they're a little more satisfied, and if they're satisfied, they have something to be grateful for. And so you're trying to increase and figure out how do you communicate that, hey, you you have a lot going for you, right? These are things that you can have gratitude for. So what we can do now, because I have everybody on the same page, is that we can tackle that issue firsthand. And so the little things with mental health stem from communication. If we have athletes that are coming in, they're feeling down, their moods, their attitudes, everything's kind of impact, we catch it. What my academic advisors might hear is not what my ATs might hear. What my ATs might hear is not what we hear. There's a lot of informal thoughts and communication. We do it on an everyday basis. And so what we do is we have a 3-tier system. First, we're pairing up with our counseling education department that's across campus. And so second-year grad students will now form and build, who want to work in the post-secondary education, relationships with the athletes. Hey, let's go get coffee. How's everything going? How are you managing the occupational stressors of being a student athlete? Second tier, we have a sport counselor, psychologist that comes in, now works with 40 of our athletes. Third tier is get to know your counseling and psychological service people on your campus, CAPS. They handle all of the, if we have eating disorders or we have suicidal tendencies, they handle the harder stuff. So we have a 3-tier system on that. That's number 1. But number 2, we have a university share drive. So we created a share drive, and we have all of our teams outlined. And within those Excel charts, we have like the 7 dimensions of wellness. And we just take those dimensions, we trade them off into call them stressors. So we have a social tab, emotional, self-awareness. So if an athlete has a relative pass away, physical, academic, and there was like a couple others. But long story short, as is outlined, what we'll do, we go in and we update this. And we get a greater picture of the interdisciplinary stressors that an athlete has. And when they have that, then we can take it to our coach and be like, hey, listen, athlete A over here is broke up with his girlfriend, is not doing well academically, rolled his ankle in practice, and the best thing for you to do right now is not to freak out on this guy in practice because he's got a ton of stressors. And so we can leverage that ability to see this stuff. Hopefully we have a better ability to identify early on, leveraging the small informal communication that you have on a daily basis to make a greater impact. I appreciate you guys being willing to listen to me and my staff and what we do. If you ever have any questions, comments, anything, you can always feel free to contact us. All my stuff's on the web, so you can call, email. We do Skype sessions for staff development, and would love to do it with all you guys as well. So please feel free to contact me anytime whatsoever. Thank you very much. Thank God.